Hey, folks. Last time I answered three of your questions from the comments, and clearly from the comments of that, you wanted more. So here's five more. So Tech Ninja 3001 says, there is the value layer for LLMs. I can switch between 20 models the moment one gets expensive. Whoever spent billions building them will be forced to price at marginal compute. So this is about the model layer. And he's saying, look, I can swap between models. So the minute the second one gets too pricey, so where is the actual value? And this is a great question. And he's right. But he's kind of making my argument for me because the model is not the moat. It never was. If you switch out a model in an afternoon, and you can do that, it's a commodity. Open source things are coming along very, very quickly. That's not where your advantage lives. Your advantage lives one layer up in the proprietary data and the operational history that your learn layer compounds on. That's the stuff that no competitor can replace. It doesn't matter what foundation model they're running. So here's the move. You don't shop for the best model. That's like a distraction for the geeks, etc. Pick the model that's good enough and instrument your workflow so that every time it runs, it gets smarter. That's the key, because the model is a commodity and it's rented. The learning you own. Proprietary learning is the actual holy grail for organizations going forward. So build the thing that you own. Next question. This is from Carl Robbins 134. Why are you against Google spreading across so many parallel projects? Isn't that exactly the startup flexibility a legacy giant needs? So this is about Google running a lot of projects in parallel and whether that's in the startup style flexibility that a big company can use or not use. So let me be careful here, because I'm not against parallel projects. I'm against parallel projects that don't have a shared purpose. Google actually does, in a sense where it says we want to organize the world's information, and there's multiple ways of doing it. And it's transitioned from being an operational search company to a platform to an ecosystem. Note that all the pieces of Google, whether it's Google, Chrome or Android or search or whatever, all feed each other. And that's very, very powerful. Now, flexibility, having flexible lots of projects without any kind of key destination or MTP, as we would call it, is going to be a problem. That's not agility. That's going to be a drift. 20 projects that all point towards different things is not rapid iteration. So the trap that I see constantly is when you have your organization, which is the drive attributes in our model, without an encoded MTP, that just produces chaos faster. It produces a lot of motion, lots of spend, but doesn't give you direction. So the fix is not in fewer projects, is in purpose control. You take your MTP from a poster on the wall and make it a protocol and a set of constraints that your agents will follow. So all your projects should run against that kind of protocol. Are you actually fulfilling a purpose? What are the things you aren't going to do? What are the boundary conditions that you want to hit? Then you parallel all you want, because now the flexibility is pointed at that broad MTP. And so Google actually is reasonably well pointed. So that's the difference between a company exploring things and a company just flailing faster than anybody else. And I say flail, not fail. So that's the difference. Next question, Kevin Waram music. The intro says the show is optimistic, then it's scenario after scenario of humans getting displaced. So which is it? This is totally fair shot at the show. The tension is very real, and I'm not going to kind of sugarcoat it, because Kevin has got something very important and very true. And here's how I hold both positions. The intelligence engine in our kind of singularity, organizational singularity model, on its own, it doesn't care about people. It's just an intelligence engine. We have drive and we have shape. But if you do drive without shape, that's just displacement. And that's true. You can point raw capacity at an industry with nothing around it, and yeah, it's a wrecking ball. That's not the optimistic story. That's the warning. The optimism, it's entirely conditional on whether leaders build the other layers in that model. Human architecture, for example. So people have a real place in the new design. Let me use the example of accounting. If you went back 100 years, we were doing double entry bookkeeping and ledgers, and everything was manual. Once we had calculators and slide rules, we accelerated the calculation, but we're still doing double entry bookkeeping. Now we have accounting software. Human being is not doing manual entry. They're lifted above the loop and they're categorizing the transactions. They're problem solving. They're looking at where the reconciliation gaps are. And we've hired way more accountants than ever before because we're doing millions of transactions more than we used to. So that same thing will happen in our processes. If you can automate the core process, you take out what Eric Brynjolfsson calls white-collar drudgery and you lift above the loop. So very critical that you have the human architecture where people have a real place in the new design where they deliver judgment, purpose control. So the whole thing is pointed towards somewhere worth building. Automation without those is not transformation. It's just running amok, and it'll be extractionary issues that are running faster. So I'm optimistic, but not about the technology. I'm optimistic about what humans can do if you can automate the grunt work. In the same way that nobody works on the factory floors in Germany, everybody's focused on design thinking, increased efficiency, problem solving, et cetera, et cetera. I'm pessimistic if you don't, if you skip all of that. And so this is kind of a promise in the intro. Whether it becomes true, it comes down to what the people are building. Simple example would be if a concrete mixing truck replaces about 100 concrete workers shoveling cement and gravel into one place. Now, nobody misses the 100 human workers. They're doing much more useful work. Let the concrete truck do what it does best. So that would be my answer there. Next question. Salim saying robots will take a long time to mature is thinking rooted in the rate of progress from years ago. He's pushing back on something I said, that robots will take longer than I expect. And he's saying that that's old thinking rooted in how progress was decades ago. Now, he's half correct, and half he's correct is the important half. So let me kind of focus on what I actually meant. When I say robots take time, I'm not talking about the technology. That's moving very fast. The ability for robots to share skills, unbelievable. The kind of this movement in sensors, we saw a couple of episodes ago on the podcast, the hand, that's kind of incredible. All correct there. The part that people underestimate is not the technology. It's in the broader scaffolding of liability, of insurance, of edge cases that we don't understand. If we take driving as an example, automated driving is a very bounded environment. We know exactly how to do it. That's taken 20 years for us to get, not because the technology wasn't there. It was there in 2010, but it's taken us almost 20 years to get the insurance models. Who's liable if a Waymo car hits somebody? Is it the car? Is it Google? Is it the software in the model? And so that's the problem. The problem when you have humanoid robots, especially in a domestic environment, humanoid robots in industrial environments, picking stuff off shelves, no problem. But humanoid robots in a domestic environment, say gardening or whatever, absolutely is going to be a huge challenge. Why? Because there's so many different weird little things that can happen. I have a dog that looks literally like a teddy bear. A humanoid robot, say, doing laundry is going to look at the dog and go, oh, teddy bear, laundry, chuck it into the washing machine. I'm exaggerating a bit, but the point is that there's so many little things that can go wrong. I make the joke that it's going to run out of power and it's going to be at my neighbor's house plugged into the Tesla charger, and my neighbor is going to complain about that because the robot's just trying to find power. Does it know where the boundaries of my property are to not garden next door? So there's all sorts of issues, like gajillions of them, that we haven't figured out yet around humanoid robots in the home. Where we have industrial use cases with lots of repetitive tasks that are prescriptive, no problem. So that's why I think it's going to take longer than people say. Peter talking about having dozens of humanoid robots at home, great, until they step on the cat or something. This is going to be a kind of an issue, a set of issues that we've never seen before. Tons of humor to be had here. Saturday Night Live is going to go crazy on some of this. Last question is, who is this podcast even for? This is from LGZ 1995. Most Americans can barely afford the current cost of living, let alone a future where the automation takes their jobs. Who is this podcast actually for? It feels disconnected from middle America. Well, bluntly, middle America is kind of disconnected from lots of places, but still, but this is the one I wanted to answer the most today. Most people can barely afford life as is. So what happens when automation replaces their work? And frankly, he's really also asking, who's this podcast for? This is the most important question anybody is asked. I don't want to dodge it because it would be easy for people to stand up and go shouting about abundance when nobody can pay their rent. So this is the uncomfortable part. If the plan is to kind of tell the middle 60% of the country that they're now exception handlers and leave it there with no real training or honest modeling of where the jobs get absorbed and no transition support, yes, that is not transformation. That's abandonment. And that's dressed up as opportunity. And I won't defend that version of it. This is why MTP has a constraint layer, hard limits on what an organization can do, can't do. And this is why purpose control doesn't ask the question, who benefits behind this flywheel, who gets left behind. Really the big issue here is the technology is going to start compounding. So the humans have to sit above the loop, find their MTP and figure out what problem they want to solve and go for it. Here's the enormous two opportunities it'll give you in this environment. One is we will get to free healthcare diagnosis capabilities within the next year. There's already 100 million people in China, in rural China, using an AI doctor to do diagnoses for free. So when you have diagnosis for free, treatment actually becomes a lot simpler also. And for education, let's take that as another big area. A child sitting in a classroom gets the same education as a child with an AI in an hour. So an hour with an AI customized to your learning patterns is the same as a kid sitting in a classroom for a whole day. This is going to break the education system, and education in the future should be free, and it'll be based on the problems a child decides to take on. So there's a lot more there. I'll get into it at some other point, but this is where the cost of living should drop dramatically over the next few years because of all of this. The problem is going to be in regulatory capture, where companies are, like, for example, QuickBooks does not want to make the tax code less complicated because then they're out of a job. Intuit would be out of a job in terms of tax treatment and their tax software. So they're lobbying heavily against the government ever making tax simpler, which is part of the problem. Biggest issue in middle America is regulatory capture, where you can't do things. The prescriptions cost way more than they should, et cetera, et cetera. That's the bigger challenge, in my opinion, than automation. We've seen, by the way, that no technology injection has ever resulted in job loss. Job transformation, yes, but not job loss. So there's a bunch of areas here to get into, and maybe it's worth a whole other thing on why I'm so optimistic about the future. But these are great questions. Great to have been here. We'll see you next time. Let us know what you think in the comments. We actively read them, and it helps us shape future content around what you find valuable. Please like the video and subscribe to support the channel.